This U.S. Air Force pilot lay completely naked, calmly stretched out inside the bomber. Shells were exploding nonstop all around him, yet he showed no reaction at all. Yossarian chose to give up like this as a form of resistance against the U.S. military's Catch-22. Near the end of World War II, the military wanted pilots to delay going home, so they established a rule. Only someone who was insane could apply for discharge, but the request had to be made personally. Once you applied, you proved you were sane, which made you ineligible. It was an unsolvable paradox. In order to go home, Yossarian had already completed 16 bombing missions. With 9 more to go, he would be free. That day, a new recruit named Mudd arrived at Yossarian's barracks. Mudd set down his luggage and went to report to the administrative tent. Yossarian told him where it was. But after Mudd left, Yossarian realized he had given him the wrong directions. Inside the command tent, the captain was giving the final mission briefing to the crew about to depart. At that moment, Mudd rushed in to report. With no proper training, he was assigned to the mission immediately. He was unprepared and had not even finished organizing his own gear. That night, Yossarian learned in the mess hall that Mudd's plane had crashed. Mudd's duffel bag was still lying quietly in the corner of their barracks, as if he had never left at all. Yossarian showed up at the infirmary once again. He claimed there was something wrong with his liver. When the nurse asked him to point to where it hurt, Yossarian pointed to a random spot. The nurse shook her head and told him that was not where the liver was. In bombing missions like this, each pilot only had to survive 25 missions to be discharged and sent home. But Yossarian pretended to be sick and hid in the hospital. He had already flown 16 missions, with only 9 left to go. He questioned whether these flights still had any meaning. The German forces were already collapsing, and the outcome of the war seemed all but decided. Rather than risk his life on a few more missions, he preferred to lie quietly in a hospital bed and wait for the war to end. Dr. Nika pointed out a brutal reality. Even if the war in Europe ended, without an official discharge, he would be transferred directly to the Pacific Theater. And survival there was even worse than in Europe. There was malaria, parasites, and fungi that could eat away at the brain. Dr. Nika's final advice was simple but heavy.
I'd fly your 9 missions if I was you.
Mission after mission, Yossarian had witnessed far too many deaths, but he himself had been lucky. Yet just as he was nearing the end of his required flights, a newly arrived colonel raised the mission count from 25 to 30. Yossarian collapsed. He went to the doctor and asked whether being crazy would get him grounded. The doctor answered yes. If a soldier was insane, he could apply to stop flying. But the moment he applied to stop flying, he proved that he was capable of rational judgment. Being capable of rational judgment meant he was not insane. And if he was not insane, he had to continue flying combat missions. Yossarian felt dizzy listening to this. This was the perfect catch-22. The rule was absurd and impossible to escape. Yossarian was trapped in an endless loop. Like a mouse caught in a cage, he could only keep running in circles, unable to find a way out. A fighter plane flew low to scare fellow soldiers. One of them picked up a javelin and challenged the pilot in the sky. But when the pilot dove down a second time, he lost control of the aircraft. The soldiers were too terrified to speak, and the pilot shouted curses at himself. He then shut off the engine and let the plane fall freely. In the end, it crashed into the mountains. Yossarian watched the scene before his eyes and felt the urge to retire. But under Catch-22, only a madman could be approved to stop flying, and the request had to be made by the madman himself. Yet once you made the request, you proved that you were not mad, but merely trying to avoid combat. As a result, you would be punished with even more missions. At the same time, the rule demanded absolute obedience to officers' orders. Otherwise, retirement was impossible. So superiors could keep increasing the number of missions, and those orders could not be disobeyed. In this endless cycle, pilots could never retire. Either they died in battle, or the war came to an end. Yossarian had no choice but to continue flying missions. Then his plane was struck by anti-aircraft fire. Yossarian was seriously wounded. Limping and enduring the pain, he applied for retirement to his commanding officer. But the officer once again invoked Catch-22. Only a madman could be excused from flying. Being sick or injured only meant cooperating with treatment. So Yossarian could only keep being treated and continue flying missions. But his plane was hit by anti-aircraft guns again. Once more, Yossarian watched a close friend die before his eyes. With thick smoke pouring out, the aircraft staggered back to the airfield. Yossarian stripped off his uniform and walked naked off the plane. Ignoring the strange looks from everyone around him, he walked into the camp. From that day on, wherever he was, Yossarian remained naked and said nothing. Even when generals came to the front to present medals, Yossarian stood there naked all the same. Yet even so, he was still assigned to fly missions. Only now, Yossarian no longer aimed at the targets below, but lay comfortably in the aircraft and looked off into the distance. The American pilot stood completely naked, calmly accepting his medal. When questioned by his superior, he showed no reaction at all. Yossarian chose to give up caring as a way to resist the U.S. military's Catch-22. In the final stages of World War II, the U.S. Army Air Forces wanted to delay pilots' retirement, so they created a regulation. Only a madman could apply to be grounded, but the application had to be submitted by the pilot himself. Yet the moment you applied, you proved that you were sane. It was an unsolvable paradox. That day, Colonel Cathcart announced to all the soldiers that a highly dangerous bombing mission would take place tomorrow. The entire briefing room fell silent. This mission meant that not everyone would come back alive. Even so, he reminded everyone that when, at some point, they felt death closing in, they should not think about the life being taken from them. Instead, they should think of those who would continue to live. Their sacrifice would ensure the survival of others. The 72nd Bombardment Group would forever remember their dedication. This was the most solemn honor the military could offer. Yossarian's mind was racing. Bologna, the strategic stronghold heavily guarded by German forces. A death trap surrounded by countless anti-aircraft guns. In the past 10 days alone, 36 B-25 bombers from other squadrons had already been shot down there, and now it was their turn. In this atmosphere of despair, a mad idea suddenly flashed through Yossarian's mind. After the meeting ended, he quietly sought out Milo, the mess officer. He pulled a bag of laundry detergent from his pack and asked Milo to put it into the evening meal. The pilot climbed out of the plane completely naked. When his teammates questioned him, he showed no reaction at all. Yossarian chose to give up caring as a way to resist the U.S. military's Catch-22. In the final stages of World War II, the U.S. military wanted to delay pilots' retirement, so they created a regulation. Only a madman could apply for retirement, and the request had to be made by the pilot himself. But once you made the request, you proved that you were sane. It was an unsolvable paradox. In order to avoid the mission to Bologna, Yossarian secretly went to Milo, the mess officer. He pulled a bag of laundry detergent from his pack and asked Milo to put it into the soup. By poisoning the food with detergent, the entire squadron would fall ill and be unable to carry out the deadly mission the next day. Under normal logic, this would be an insane plan. But in the world of Catch-22, making yourself sick on purpose to avoid certain death might be the most rational choice. Milo's voice suddenly became serious. He emphasized that he was the mess officer. His duty was to make sure the pilots ate well, not to make them seriously ill. Yossarian argued back that Milo's real duty was to keep them alive, saying he would rather be sick than dead. Milo's expression began to change. The next day, the entire base fell into chaos. Yossarian's plan had worked, but bad news soon followed. Milo told him they still had to go to Bologna. Even worse, the original ground support had been canceled. This meant Yossarian and the others would once again fly deep into enemy territory alone, with no support at all. In order to survive, Yossarian made an even bolder move. He shifted the bombing line. This was the second deadliest branch of service in World War II, and no matter how careful you were, you could still be randomly hit by anti-aircraft fire. Yossarian could only watch as a teammate was blown against the cockpit glass. The sight filled him with growing terror. The plane soon returned to base, and he thought he was close to finishing his missions and retiring. But his superiors used an absurd excuse to raise everyone's required missions from 30 to 35 before retirement. Yossarian panicked. He immediately went to the doctor, pretending to be sick and asking for help, hoping the doctor could apply for his retirement. But Catch-22 clearly stated that only a crazy man could apply for retirement. Yet once a crazy man applied, it proved he was not crazy at all, just trying to dodge the war as a coward. Yossarian finally understood that this was nothing but a trap, so he chose another path. He volunteered to fly missions for his comrades. At that time, Yossarian still had 10 missions left. The moment he stepped off a plane, he volunteered to fly in place of another pilot. Plane after plane, mission after mission, switching aircraft again and again, he completed all 11 remaining missions within just 6 days. Yossarian returned to the base in excitement. He walked into his commander's office and laid out all 11 mission records at once. The female officer stamped all 11 pages with the squadron seal, but the paperwork still had to be approved and stamped by the colonel. The colonel calmly replied that stamping here required a formal process. With that, he brushed Yossarian aside. Yossarian believed he could finally go home. Before retiring, he went to Italy and celebrated for 3 days and 3 nights. But when he returned, the colonel made it clear that the required number of missions had been raised to 40. That meant Yossarian still had 5 more missions to fly before he could retire, because Catch-22 demanded absolute obedience to all orders from superiors. Once again, Yossarian fell back into the trap, a trap he could never escape.